Evil stepmother makes fun of my mom's death, so I exposed her dirty secrets. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. Fair warning, this story stretches out over the period of more than a decade, so it's going to be a long one. So first, some backstory. I came from your average nuclear family. I had a mom and dad who hated each other and seemed to spend their whole marriage talking about divorce. An older sister whom I did not get along with, but as time went on would not only become my best friend, but also kind of my hero. And me, the youngest, 14 years old when this all started. Very relevant to the story, my dad, until losing his job only a few months ago, worked overseas most of my life, and was only home 5 months of the year. So our tale begins with my mother succumbing to her long battle with cancer. She'd been hospitalized for quite some time, and I'll admit that those last few months, I had given up completely. I had hardly gone to see her. I just couldn't bring myself to see her rotting away in that hospital bed. My dad hadn't been much better than me, and the hero of this story had been my sister, the one who had never gotten along with my mother, who held her hand until the very end. None of this is vital to the story, but it was the point where my sister not only won my respect, but also became the one person whom I would grow to trust more than any other. My dad, not so much. In fact, his life had hardly changed at all, and my mom's ashes had hardly been released and he was overseas again, leaving me and my sister behind. Also worth mentioning that at this time, my sister was no longer living at home, but with her fiancé. He later cheated on her, she broke off the engagement, and he will therefore not feature in this story. So all the pieces are set in place. My mom is dead, my dad's overseas, and my sister's living elsewhere, leaving me, a 14-year-old kid, living alone in what, until recently, was our family home. Soon after, I got a tenant to take one of the rooms, and that rent money paid for all my living expenses. Now, as I mentioned, my dad was out of the country only 7 months of the year, which meant he was home for 5 of them. Or so you'd expect. The truth is, he wasn't. My dad was a skirt chaser, and even in those 5 months, I hardly ever saw him as he'd be out staying with whatever he was hooking up with at the time. I could write about 1,000 more stories about the women he dated in that time, but as none of them have relevance to this story, I'm skipping forward 4 years, and the introduction to my evil stepmother. It's worth mentioning that when she and my dad started dating, he was actually already engaged to someone else, whom kinda just disappeared from the story as if she was never in his life to begin with. Evil stepmother was the wife of a deceased politician. I've never been able to figure out how much exactly he left her, but my estimate is somewhere between 15 and 20 million. Although neither my sister or I had any interest in money, her financial status was something of a relief, as my dad was pretty well off himself, so at the very least, we knew she wasn't a gold digger. So actually, when I first met her, she was lovely, polite, a good sense of humor, overall just a nice person to be around. And I was truly happy that my dad had found somebody who could make him happy. Skip forward another year, my sister is now engaged to a new guy and was starting to plan her wedding. My sister, being the angel that she is, even with a multi-millionaire father, never asked him to contribute a single penny to the wedding. What did she ask him? For him and evil stepmother to attend. He was her dad after all. Note that even though I'm calling her evil stepmother, she wasn't officially our stepmother yet at this point. She'd given the date to evil stepmother, who had kind of brushed it off and said they would try to attend, but they couldn't make any promises because it might interfere with their holiday plans. My sister was understandably distraught and ultimately just called off the wedding and would end up taking their vows in front of a judge. So a few weeks after evil stepmother had broken my sister's heart, she and my dad were traveling to God knows where, and my sister and I were at the movies. We both get the same text from evil stepmother. It went something like this.
Hello, I wanted you to know that your father has asked me to become his wife, and I have accepted.
I forget what the rest said. Cut forward to the day that my sister's wedding would have taken place, and we both get an invite to evil stepmother's house. My dad had long since moved in with her. I had a bad feeling about this, but thought to myself that no one can possibly be so unnecessarily cruel. But if people weren't, then I would not be writing this story. So, you guessed it, evil stepmother had stolen my sister's wedding date and had married our dad that morning. The invite we had received was to their wedding reception. There's going to be a massive time jump now. But before I do, I just want to emphasize some of the highlights of my dad and evil stepmother's first marriage. Yes, you heard that right. These included a house rule which strictly forbid me or my sister ever mentioning our deceased mother, and me making the grave sin of turning 21. I'd like to point out that at no point did I ask my father to cut their vacation short to celebrate this with me, but he decided to come to surprise me and came home a day earlier to do so. The next 5 years, years, and I'm not making that up, every single time evil stepmother saw me, she would berate me for how my birthday screwed up their vacation. Another one is her and my dad showing up at the family house while I was at work, taking the family dogs and giving them away without so much as consulting me. And to top it all off, she would constantly try and play my sister and me up against each other, always cornering one of us and telling us what a waste of space the other was. So skip forward about another year. I had now been the landlord of the family house for about 7 years. I was now renting out to several tenants and using that money to rent the house from my dad. The rest I used to upkeep the place as well as I possibly could. Basically, even though his name was still on the deed, it was pretty much accepted that the house was now mine, and would officially become mine when my dad passes. The place was beyond sentimental to me. And then, one afternoon, he shows up with a car full of things declaring that he's left evil stepmother and was moving back in with me. Oh joy. Following this, it took less than a month for all my tenants to break their contracts and move out. Yes, he really was that difficult to live with. The month ended and he went back overseas, leaving me with an empty house and somehow still expecting me to pay him for that month's rent. Sorry, Dad, you kinda screwed that up for yourself. He returned 6 weeks later and fell back into his old patterns, never coming home, hooking up with any woman that looked at him, and then somehow getting back together with the fiancée that he had left for evil stepmother. His divorce from evil stepmother had already been finalized by this point. And then, almost as if I was 18 years old again, he once again left that same fiancée for evil stepmother. At some point, they got remarried. I honestly don't even remember when. So, let's get to the main part of this story. Yes, I haven't even touched it yet. A secret about my dad. I love him dearly, but he is a freaking jerk. I learned this the hard way as I would become a pawn in his numerous affairs. He went so far as to send some of these women to stay in the family house with me and then invite me over to have dinner with him and evil stepmother, forcing me to fake a smile while the woman he was cheating with was literally hiding at my house. This went on for years. Both I and my sister knew about it. Both of us had begged him to stop, and he just didn't give two hecks. Also, during this period, my sister had given birth to a beautiful baby girl. Even though my dad and evil stepmother had already been having marital problems at the time, again, he had shown up with her to the hospital and introduced her as grandma. In the years that followed, this gorgeous little one would actually bring my sister and evil stepmother quite close together, which makes this all the more tragic. Flash forward several more years. I'm now 30 and going through a very tough time in my life. I had lost my own fiancé, in part due to my family shunning both of us and ultimately forcing me to choose between them and her. This basically happened every single time I got a girlfriend. I had lost all my savings trying to save my beautiful dog from a rare blood disease. She died a month later anyway. I'd been falsely accused of forcing myself onto someone, and basically, I was having darker thoughts than I ever imagined possible. And to top that all off, my dad left evil stepmother, and once more moved back in with me. To make matters even worse, he wasn't doing so alone. No, he brought with him his Asian mistress, a lady that could not speak a word of English, and they were literally communicating with each other via Google Translate. This whole situation was pretty messed up. Just to keep the timeline straight, he had left her before going back to work overseas, and had warned me beforehand that he would be moving back in with me upon his return. At no point had he mentioned his Asian mistress. Also, slightly relevant, the day he came back was the 24th of December. At this time, evil stepmother was on the verge of her own mental breakdown and was calling my sister day and night, trying to learn why my dad had left her. This went on for the entire time that my dad was overseas and continued when he came back. My sister was calling me in tears, saying she could not keep this secret anymore. She had grown fond of evil stepmother and knew the only way to release her was to tell her about the affairs. There had been 8 that we know of. I, on the other hand, had never grown to like evil stepmother, but even I had always been disgusted by our father's behavior and never saw any justification in what he had been doing to her. Ultimately, I told my sister to just tell her. That would be the biggest mistake of my life. You see, learning of dad's betrayal had given evil stepmother a new purpose in life. She wasn't only going to get revenge on my dad, she was going to get revenge on everyone that was involved. Her first mission was finding out who the woman was that was currently staying with him. To find out, she turned to me. Now, side note here, I'd been so angry at my dad for this whole situation that I hadn't even been back to my house since he had moved back in. I had spent about 3 days, including Christmas, just driving around aimlessly. I had slept in my car for those nights. I was done being his accomplice. Therefore, when evil stepmother asked me who the woman was, I happily told her. There was just one problem with this. My dad had foreseen me turning on him and given me the wrong information. Therefore, in the eyes of evil stepmother, I had purposefully sent her on a wild goose chase. Following this, my dad had sent me a message saying that I was no longer his son. The woman had actually been a masseuse at a massage parlor that both my dad and evil stepmother often frequented, less than a kilometer away from their home. To this day, I don't know how evil stepmother found this out, but she showed up at the massage parlor and started screaming and threatening to sue. She also started following my dad's mistress around. What happened next, she refuses to admit was her doing, but a few days later, someone sent naked photos of my dad's mistress to her boss, and she was subsequently fired. My dad in the meantime had grown bored with her as well, and had started to rebuild his marriage with evil stepmother. This was unbeknownst to both me and my sister, and made even less sense when their second divorce finalized. My dad's mistress around this time also completely vanished off the face of the earth. Did I mention that evil stepmother liked to brag about the mob connection she had left from her deceased husband's time in politics, and had openly told us how they could make people just completely disappear? Cut forward a few months later. I hadn't seen my dad in months, and still had no idea that he and evil stepmother had gotten back together. I found this out when his Facebook relationship status changed to married to evil stepmother, followed by their wedding pictures. This was kind of a shock to me, but the biggest one was still to come. I was still in financial difficulty, following my recent streak of bad luck, and then I got a text. I forget what the exact wording was, but it basically came down to the fact that evil stepmother no longer felt comfortable living in their old place, knowing that he had met his mistress so close there. So he was taking back the family home, and I was going to have to evict all my tenants and move out myself. At that point, I'd been living in that house for 19 years, and had been the acting landlord for 16 of those. To add fuel to the fire, I also learned that evil stepmother was having the old house demolished and building a new place on top of it. I was shattered. That place had meant more to me than anything else in this world, and she was coming in with bulldozers to destroy it. To make up for my sudden eviction, they had, however, taken the liberty of already finding me a new place to live that they knew would be within my budget. They took me there a few days later. This place was terrifying. It was the kind of place where you'd get shot in the face if you left your home after dark. To make matters worse, they were right. It was literally the only place I could afford at that point, and on such short notice. Dad of the year and evil stepmother had left me to pack up the entire house, including everything left from my mother. The shoebox I was moving to obviously didn't have space for any of these things, so most of it ended up on the sidewalk. To evil stepmother, this had to have been like a mini orgasm, as she had always had an unnatural hate towards my deceased mother, whom she had never met and died before she met my father. She would go so far as to destroy every single thing that held any memory of my mother, even cutting down our family tree and quite literally turning it into firewood. She also took my mother's wedding ring that had been left to my sister to hold for safekeeping, only to quite literally throw it away and deny ever having it. That was her revenge on me. My sister, she had other plans for. You see, once my sister had exposed my father's affair to her, she wasted no time in revealing to him that my sister had sold him out. My dad, being the self-entitled person that he is, still was unable to see that he had been in the wrong here, and basically had not spoken to my sister since. He had not only stopped speaking to her, but had also stopped talking to his granddaughter. Both him and evil stepmother had been quite active in her life for the first few years, and now both had completely written her off. As I write this, 2 years after my sister had exposed my dad, he has not spoken to or even asked about his granddaughter once. I had confronted him about this on several occasions, but he just kind of shrugged me off and told me that I've not once taken into account how hard these last 2 years have been on him. It also later turned out that evil stepmother was monitoring his phone, and I'm pretty sure she'd been deleting any messages that my sister had tried sending him. About all this being hard on him, he was right. You see, even though my dad may have brought all this upon himself, I do feel truly sorry for him. Evil stepmother had taken away from all of us what she deemed most important to us. With me, it was my house and all my memories. With my sister, it was her relationship with her father. And with my father, it was his freedom. She had taken away all forms of privacy and freedom he had left. She had taken control of his bank accounts, taken to monitoring his incoming messages, deleted all his friends from his Facebook account, and lost him his job. The new house they built even had an open bathroom that you could literally not pee in private. It was disturbing and honestly very hard to witness. This story really doesn't have an ending. My sister has finally stopped trying to make up with my dad. The few times I have seen him have been under strict supervision from evil stepmother. That usually ends with her fighting me and telling me what a stain I am on his life. Although I never saw my dad as any kind of saint, he was always my dad, and I always loved him. Still do. But the man he is now is no longer a man. He's a prisoner. Evil stepmother has turned him into a real-life version of Theon Greyjoy. And for the life he's feeling now, I feel nothing but sadness. Wow. Well, we were warned, guys. It was a long one. I do have to say, though, that after getting all of that information, I kind of can't help but feeling invested. It really does sound like the original poster has had a really hard time, ever since the beginning when they were 14 years old. Their mother passing away just really kind of sent everything into a downward spiral. And it sounds like this dad is literally one of the worst of all time, which makes it all the more poignant that the original poster actually does still feel sorry for him at the end. You could argue that he received his just desserts for everything that he had put everyone through over the years, but it sounds like even our original poster, who had more reason to hate him than anyone else, doesn't feel he deserves this. That's how bad our evil stepmother is. She literally sounds like something out of a fairy tale. How can a person be so hateful? There's a lot of things that happened here in this story that bother me, but one that really hits hard is how much she seems to just hate our original poster's deceased mother. You literally never met the woman. It's like you're just jealous that she got there first. And somehow the fault then gets passed to her daughters? This woman honestly just sounds horrible and very, very spiteful. Now, one of the issues that I take here is you guys kind of knew this for a long time and still chose to tell her about what was going on with your father. Again, just desserts. I get it. You felt maybe there had to be some repercussions for his actions, but it sounds like you knew what was going to happen when you set her loose on him. So I do feel it's kind of hard to backpedal after that. But the thing that really hurts the most, I think, is how he lost the house. It was something that was very important to him and had essentially been his for a very long time. That was where he had lived with his mother. And as the poster said, they had a lot of their mother's stuff still there, a lot of which ended up having to tragically be thrown away. Not to mention his sister's kid losing her grandmother and grandfather. I just feel that there was a whole lot of unnecessary loss here. It really is unfortunate when the kids have to suffer the repercussions of just having crappy parents. In this case, one parent and an evil step-parent. But I can only imagine for kids in this kind of situation, how many times you must wonder what life would be like if your real mom was still around. Being able to trace everything back to a single point where everything went wrong, it must be a lot to have to deal with. I'm sure everyone has a moment like that if we really look hard enough, but it really does sound like everyone else in our original poster's life just wasn't a great person. Sister aside, but she also had to go out and live her own life. I do feel like maybe there could have been a little more effort to do something for your little brother though. I don't feel like any 14-year-old should be living in a house alone renting out rooms to strangers. It really does feel like no one gets a happy ending on this one. I changed my best man for the wedding after finding out I'm not even being invited to his wedding, just the after party. So a while ago, I asked my best friend of 25 years to be my best man at my wedding. He said yes, and from there, things were fine. I'm due to get married in March, and recently him and his fiancée made the decision to speed up their wedding and get married in April. Now, I'm not saying I expected to be his best man, as I'm sure he has other friends too. However, I did think I would at least get an invite to his actual wedding. But this isn't the case. Me and my fiancé received a Facebook message from a group page saying we were invited to his after party, but that was it. I understand the restriction of venues, but to say the least, it hurt my feelings not to be invited. So I made the decision to change my best man, as he hasn't really done anything a best man would do anyway. He'll still be invited to the wedding, but now I feel like I'm in the wrong. Am I being a jerk? So for this one, I feel on immediate inspection, it might look a little jerky or as if our original poster is being a little petty. However, as they said, this was their best friend of 25 years. I'm sure not even being invited to the wedding is a real blow. And at the end of the day, it's up to you who you want to stand up there beside you. So if this has happened and this is how you now feel about the person and you don't want them there, that's entirely up to you. I'm not really going to call you a jerk for this one. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.